Alrighty. So I am Stephanie Milligan. I'm interviewing Devin Carter today, and Mr. Carter is currently at Lancaster High School in the Northern Neck of Virginia. It is February 25th, 2025, and we're going to be hosting an interview looking into European context for the Massachusetts Bay Colony, how it developed and led to the witch trials, with looks into the anxieties of the New World and use of spectral evidence. So, Mr. Carter, if you could please give me a little bit of background about yourself, what you currently do, a little bit about your education, anything you'd like to share for this.
Sure. Like you said, my name is Devin Carter. I was educated at two different universities, the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, where I got my undergraduate in both history and social studies education. Then I got my master's just in history, no education or anything like that, from the Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I did both of those in the early 2010s, and I moved down here and been teaching at Lancaster for the last 9 years. During that time, I've been their dual enrollment U.S. history teacher, taught world history, government, world history two, just everything that you've got, everything that we got, I taught. So
Thank you so much for giving a little bit of background on what you do in your education. So, we're going to go ahead and get started with our questions. So, first and foremost, why was witchcraft prominent in European culture?
So it's really interesting that that's how we started off, because when most people think of witchcraft, they think of, I don't know, something like really negative, or like burning of witches, or like movies and stuff like that. But everywhere in every culture has had some kind of magical practice, going all the way back to the ancient Mesopotamians, ancient Chinese. There's always been some sort of magical practice. And what's really differentiated kind of, you know, good magic and bad magic has usually been the religion. So, for example, oh, great.
Attention teachers, parents are beginning to arrive, so please make sure you're in your rooms and don't.
Hopefully that would be the,
You're
let's hope
good.
that's the only interruption. So yeah, it just kind of goes back to the idea of, good magic versus bad magic. And there's always been good magic with things like oracles and different offerings that you could make to the gods. And then there's always been bad magic. And in general, that's been called witchcraft. So when you go all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia, and then you go into Europe, so Europe was specifically influenced by like the Christian religion. So going all the way back to the 700s, 800s, you had some of the first witch trials in Europe. And again, it just goes back to that kind of fear of the bad magic, where there's always been some type of good, there's always been some type of bad. And witchcraft has always been that type of bad. And there's a book, it's the Malleus Maleficarum, which is the
Yes.
hammer of witches, that was around the 1400s. So a solid, 200 years before the Salem Witch Trials ever happened. I mean, it's called the Hammer of Witches. The book was about how to identify, try, and everything that you needed to do with witches. So, I mean, just the fact that magic has been a prominent thing in every culture for thousands of years, Europe would be absolutely no different.
Yeah, so it's really interesting that you bring up the Hammer of Witches, because in a lot of my research that I've been doing specifically on this topic and colonial America in general, when it comes to witchcraft, that book comes up many times as context. And I find that really interesting that a lot of people, when you talk to them about, it doesn't matter if it's European witchcraft, if it's colonial America, it's one of the first things that's brought up. So I
Right.
really think that is very interesting that there's that kind of keystone information that gives a lot of good information on that and where that came
Mm-hmm.
from. So following up to that, what were the main pillars of the Massachusetts Bay Colony culture and society?
So the Massachusetts Bay Colony, like most New England colonies, was really based around religion, and their society, their culture, their laws, their politics. All of that was centered around the Puritan religion, and it was an extremely, I mean, I don't know, repressive is not the right word, but it is not a very liberal religion. So I'll give you an example here. The Quakers, who are known as the Society of Friends, who are very, peaceful, nonviolent, gender equality. When the first Quakers were coming into the Massachusetts Bay Colony to preach, Quakerism, they were threatened to get their ears chopped off or have holes bored in their tongue if they kept coming back. So, I mean, just looking at the type of Christianity that was really important to the Massachusetts Bay Colony, it is not one of a lot of tolerance or a lot of acceptance for other people. So I would say the main pillar of the Massachusetts Bay Colony was a Puritan religion that was very intolerant and unaccepting of other people.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. So what were some beliefs and culture from Europe that were or were not brought to the New World that you believe would act as context to how the Bay Colony was established?
So it's really interesting because if you look back beginning in the early 1500s, one of the things that we'll see with the Protestant Reformation is kind of this fear. You had the fear of Catholics for one, if you were a Protestant, and Protestants if you were a Catholic. So right there's a general atmosphere of fear. I think that's being brought over because when you look at the people who are coming over to Puritan Massachusetts. They've got the French that are up in Canada. They've got Native Americans. They've got other Christians who are not Puritans there. They've got all of these things that I think that they're very fearful of. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of, okay, we are going here to establish our religion. We're going here to do this. But I think there's really a culture of fear that gets brought with them to the Americas, and they're persecuted in their own home at times. And I think one of the things that they leave is tolerance. I don't think tolerance is brought with them. I think that's something that and again, it's the 1600s, so tolerance compared to our standards today is probably much different. But just by their own writings and their own self admissions, they're not a very tolerant people.
Yes, I agree. I think there's a lot of writing in letters or journals or even in court records that have nothing to do with the witch trials that talk about, the judge making a comment about something that has nothing to do with the trial itself.
Right.
So it's very interesting looking at the context and kind of comparing the two different cultures. And that's why I think it's important, especially in this question, saying were or were not, because I think we focus a lot on what is brought over when we look at colonial America. So looking at the were not, I do find very interesting because I feel like that adds a little bit more to how we developed.
Right.
Um,
Absolutely.
so who were the main people that created and led society and class order in Salem?
Well, I mean, generally you can say white men. That's just who it would be, and specifically white men who are within the structure of the church itself. So, if you wanted to be a full-fledged citizen of really anywhere in Massachusetts Bay, you had to be you had to be a male. You had to be a church member in good standing. So that means that you had to regularly attend church. You had to give to the church. And one thing with Salem Village in particular, and just Salem, it was a really they were kind of mean and nasty towards each other. Like there's records that you can go and there's things that you can see where this person's suing this person over this property line, and this person's suing this person for this reason, and this person's got taken to court for that. But again, it tends to be like white men and like the magistrates and all of the governors and the judges and the people who are in charge. So, for example, you're going to have people like James Bailey be one of the first ministers. George Burroughs will be another one. Samuel Parris will be the minister, the first ordained minister when actually the witch trials occur. We had a couple of magistrates, John Hawthorne and Jonathan Corwin, two important magistrates that were heard some of the first trials. So I'd say in general, white men, but there's a couple of names for you as well.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. Could you please explain some of the most important laws of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and how the class system played a part in the creation and implementation of these laws?
Yes, absolutely. So when I saw this question, I was actually particularly interested in it because if you actually go to the Massachusetts Bay, I think it's I found it on like the stateofmassachusetts.com, and in their archives, I pulled up their laws that were from like 1639 till 17 something. I can't remember the 17, but under chapter 18, which is outlawing capital offenses. So, these are the capital crimes. These are the serious ones. The first one is idolatry, so not worshiping any other god. The second one is participating in witchcraft. So
Yeah.
in the order that they wanted to make their laws, they said, idolatry first, witchcraft second, blasphemy third, and then I think like third or fourth was like murder. So before they classified murder as a capital punishment, they wanted to make sure they classified blasphemy and idolatry and witchcraft as more serious crimes than, well, maybe not more serious crimes, but they thought to put those ones in first, then murder. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, oh, we got
Yes.
to make sure we take care of the idolaters, the witches, and the blasphemers. Yeah, then the murderers. Then we'll take care of the murderers. So I just thought that was particularly important. So and again, it with social class, it really to me it shows that if you are not someone who is an accepted person in their church, then you could be targeted by these laws. Because if you're not someone who is in good standing, you're not someone who attends, you could easily be accused of any of these things. Like, oh, I haven't seen so and so at church for a while, and they're kind of the lower class, or whatever. But to me, it seems like these laws, they target the class of people who are not regular churchgoers, which was really, really what was important to the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
Yeah, I agree. It is interesting, the order of which they put the laws, and I also find it most interesting that because talking to the general public, I feel that they would believe that witchcraft was the number one, but the idolatry was before that.
Right.
And then so I always think that is so interesting to look into because, well, in witchcraft you do have idolatry, so I guess they put it all together into the one.
Correct. Yeah, it's like 1, 2, and 3 are all just, hey, don't go against what we say God is.
Yeah, it's kind of like the fine print of the first one, basically, is the ones that follow.
Correct. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So, how did the fear of the unknown, Native Americans, and the anxieties of frontier life potentially contribute to the witch trials?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, one of the things I think they brought over was fear. And, this is a time period from the early 1600s to the late 1600s, especially with English politics. That's when you have the execution of Charles I and Oliver Cromwell and his parliament. And then you see the restoration under his son Charles II, and then James, but then James gets kicked out for William and Mary, and that whole thing. So there's a lot of political turmoil going on there. And while that's all going on, the English and the French are still fighting. God knows they love to fight each other all the time. And one of the places that fighting took place was in the United States, or what will come the United States, the colonies, between the French Canadians up in Quebec and the Americans along the East Coast. And one of the things that Essex County, that the Massachusetts Bay Colony will see, is different refugees coming in from those places. So you have French people or other non-Protestants coming into this place who are already, oh God, they're going to spread their ideas. And then it's really going to be the Native Americans who are causing those people to come there, because the French did not have as many settlers as the English. But what they did have were competent military officers who were able to go to these different Native tribes and say, hey, let's work out a deal where we're on the same side. And then using a lot of that Native support, we're able to raid English settlements, and we're able to conduct a lot of their offense that way. So if you're a Puritan who's living in the wilderness, you've got the natives who are the ones perpetrating this. You have the French who are the ones kind of financing this. Both of them, God, one is a Catholic and the other one's a whatever they believe, devil worship and I'm pagan and all that kind of stuff. So just the sheer fact that they are complete opposites of what the Puritans believe. I mean, there were again, and this is what I love about history. You can always look at your sources. You can take what you want for what you want. One of the sources that I've seen is they kind of use French as like a boogeyman. Like they would scare their kids, like, "Hey, you better make sure that you do what you're supposed to do, or some evil French person, or they're gonna come in and make trouble for you." Like they were literally a way to scare little kids to get them to do what they wanted to do. So I mean, that right there just shows you that the fear was very real for them. Whether or not it's founded is up for debate, but the fear was there.
Yes, it's very interesting using it as this boogeyman. There was a time previously where my husband and I actually visited up in Massachusetts and in Danvers actually,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a legend that was created by those who colonized that specific area called the Acamacho, and it was this evil being that was summoned by the Native Americans specifically to come after the children of the colonists. So
Yeah. Uh-huh. So how could you not be terrified?
I'd be terrified personally if I was a kid in a new
Oh yeah.
place.
Uh-huh. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the next question for you is, how did social tensions and power dynamics within the Bay Colony play a role in these accusations?
So this is one of the things that I thought was very interesting with how the Salem witch trial played out. Because at first, with Reverend Parrish's daughter and his niece, they are targeting. They target an enslaved woman. They target two other women who are old, or the woman who is old, and then another woman who is already kind of downtrodden and not part of the established society. So the first accusations are clearly, who can we blame? Like, oh, this is an easy person to blame. We always mess up and we blame our enslaved individual. Let's blame her again. Or, oh, that woman, she's old and creepy, so clearly she has something to do with why I have a fever right now. So at first, you saw that there was clearly like targeting towards these groups of people. Then by the end of the witch trials, you see more prominent people starting to get accused. People like Giles Corey, who was a church member and a landowner, and you start to see, or you start to at least think, oh, maybe the motivations for why these people have accused them have changed. Maybe there's no longer a genuine, like maybe at first the girls were scared because they got caught doing something wrong, so they blamed people easy to blame, and then hysteria picks up. People who are genuinely scared of witches make accusations. Other people recognizing, oh, I might be able to profit from this. They kind of hop on that bandwagon, because by the end, William Phipps, his wife, what was it, Mary? She gets accused of being a witch too, and that's when he's like, all right, we gotta shut this down for a little bit. So I think it's really interesting to see how the classes of people change as the trials progress.
Yeah, almost to whatever suited whoever was in power at that point.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, describe the role spectral evidence played in the trials. Were there any grounds for this usage during that period?
So, as I'm sure spectral evidence is literally when someone is asleep and they are claiming that the spirit of that person has come to them in some kind of dream, or whatever it is, and it is afflicting them. Or if they see them when they're awake, and they can't stand to see them, they can afflict at a glance. I mean, no, there is no grounds. There is no rational, moral, modern day grounds. Yes, back then. Now, back then, that might be a different story, because this is pre-germ theory. This is pre-modern medical science. This is when you went to the doctor, and the doctor legitimately could say, yeah, there's probably something supernatural wrong with you. There's something that I can't explain, must be, I know, like demons, or it must be some kind of supernatural force that I cannot explain. So imagine if you go to your doctor and your doctor tells you, yeah, it's probably ghosts or demons. Oh my God, I'm ghosts or demons. So, excuse me, if that's something that you could get a medical diagnosis for, it does not surprise me that the same kind of, oh, well, this spirit or this happened or that is used in a court of law. Again, if you look at it from our modern standpoint, that is it's absurd, it's ridiculous. But if you're using kind of the time period where this stuff was not absurd, it was not ridiculous, it was very real, and it was very much accepted to be real, then, you know, at the time, it's interesting because people like Cotton Mather and his father Increase Mather, they both wrote on the use of spectral evidence. And at first, I think Cotton was a little bit in favor of it. And then they finally executed a person, and then they're like, "Oh, well, hold on, you know, let's take it back a little bit." So it's interesting to see that people contemporaries, some supported it, and then maybe once they saw it in practice, they kind of reared back a little bit. So it's interesting because, you know, you can always say, oh, you can't judge historical figures by our modern views. But I'd argue, you know, there's people who are always against slavery. There was people who always saw this as a problem. So you can't just say, oh, well, you can't condemn this person. Well, I'm pretty sure the enslaved people didn't want to ever be enslaved. You know, so it's always that kind of mentality. So
Right.
just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's always kind of, you know, this person versus this person versus this group sort of thing, you know, and then
Right.
pulling back, like touching a hot stove after a while, be like, oh, whoa, maybe we back it up a little bit.
Correct. Right. Yeah. It's like maybe that wasn't the best idea. I know my hand was cold, but maybe the hot stove wasn't the best place to put it on.
Right, right. So how did the reliance on spectral evidence contribute to the hysteria surrounding the trials?
So at that point, I think even if you were someone who didn't believe in the witches, if you thought this was all, you know, blown up and everything, you could still be accused. You know, you don't physically have to be anywhere. You don't have to do a dang thing. And you can be accused if that person or that, you know, whoever says, oh, you know, Devin Carter, I saw his spirit in my house last night, and now my stomach hurts, and his spirit told me that he was going to make my stomach hurt unless I did this or that or something like that. So I mean, yeah, it's just I kind of lost my train of thought there.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, the hysteria. I'm like, yeah. So that definitely allowed for people to definitely get more worked up about it, because if you don't have to do anything wrong, if you can just be sitting there, if you can just be living your normal life and still be accused of witchcraft, it almost becomes, well, I need to accuse someone else before they accuse me. And I feel like that definitely helped contribute. So whether or not you believed in it, whether or not you thought it was real, you still probably participated in it out of a, you know, cover your own butt kind of maneuver.
Right, right. It's more of a, you know, before they can get me situation. Right,
Right.
right. So can you give a specific example of a case where spectral evidence was used to convict someone during the witch trials?
So there was a guy, I already mentioned him. He was the second minister who came to Salem, and his name was George Burroughs. And George Burroughs was not, you know, he didn't stay. They never ordained him. They actually never even paid him the full amount of money that they were going to pay him, kind of showing the shystiness of them. But the story with him is that I can't remember who accused him, but someone accused him of kind of being like the ringleader, the person who was going into the forest and having these meetings and getting all of these people involved with you know, this witch's coven and you know, blah blah blah. Literally, this is where the spectral evidence comes in. One of the accusers said that the spirit of George came to her and told her, I'm not going to teach the word of Christ, I'm going to teach the word of the devil. Which, if you really think about, yeah, I'm going to completely reveal my plan to you so you can go ahead and blab my plan everywhere. So that spectral evidence was used against Burroughs. And then on the gallows, one of the things that a convicted witch or a supposed witch was not supposed to be able to do was recite the Lord's Prayer. And he does. And he's able to recite this Lord's Prayer, but he's still, you know, he's still murdered anyway. And that to me is a perfect example of how the only thing that convicted him was spectral evidence, because it would be like, all right, what's the one thing a guilty person can't do? Well, they can't do this. And then the guilty person does it. oh, well, that's just proof that they were really guilty. There's no way to win then. So really the only evidence they had against him was that testimony of the spectral evidence, because the other thing, oh, a witch couldn't do this. Well, here I am currently performing it in front of you. So am I still a witch? Yes. So I think
Yeah.
his case was really one where, spectral evidence played a big role.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that information on that. So what are some misconceptions about the Puritans of Salem that you believe the public should know more about or believe should be clarified?
So one of the things I think that needs to be clarified is kind of what I was bringing up earlier, is that we look at them now as maybe ignorant, unintelligent, backwards, fearful, all of these things, superstitious. But I think it's important to realize that this is a time period before modern science. This is a time period when these were the accepted beliefs and traditions, and witches were not Halloween costumes and movies like they are for us today. They were very real forces of very real evil. The devil was a very real thing that impacted people's daily lives. So this is not as abstract and as arbitrary as maybe we view it today, but it's definitely something that I think more people would understand, why the hysteria happened, why spectral evidence was ever allowed to be used, because when we look at it from a modern view, all of that seems silly or ridiculous when, at the time there may have been some people who were like, yeah, we went a little bit too far, but no one ever questioned whether or not witches were real and whether, they had a negative effect on people. So those things were very much well accepted. And in 400 years, what are people going to look back at us and say, oh my God, how silly were these people to believe in X, Y, and Z and ABC? Like now we clearly know. And so it's kind of the same thing.
Right, right. Yeah, it's almost as that's the thing about history is all of it is context to the future that hasn't even happened yet, pretty much,
Correct.
So when you're
Correct.
living in it, it's very different and it all adds up to each other in some way.
I mean, it's always the end of the world, right? It's always the end of the world. The end of
Yes.
the world is happening. The first apocalyptic texts were written by the ancient Sumerians.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes. Oh my goodness. So how are the witch trials interpreted today? What are some key debates around them?
So, from what I've seen, some of the debates go back to, well, one of them is, was it ergot, or was it this mass hysteria? What was the cause of it? Um, and I think they're viewed today as a tragedy, which they absolutely are. They're absolutely a tragedy. But I also think, kind of going back to the answer with the last question, is they're kind of viewed in a like a simplistic, rustic, maybe foreign thing, like, oh, this is something that happened all the way back then because of these ignorant people. And today, oh, nothing like that could ever happen today, when you could go back to the 1950s and look at the McCarthy trials. You can look at the 2000s and after September 11th, the anti-Islamic phobia and stuff like that. So I think it's understanding, hopefully, that we understand today that it wasn't about necessarily witches. It was about fear of the unknown, fear of evil, fear of just fear in general. So just kind of reframing them from this weird blip in history to something that we can still apply, and the lessons can still be applied today.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned at the start of this, witchcraft, witch trials, has really taken on different shapes and forms, whether good or bad. And I think it's interesting when we go back toward even ancient periods of time where was a specific person, a specific group, or an ideology that somehow became, the quote unquote witch that
Right.
people would come after and decide, well, that's the thing we're doing now. Suddenly all of us are scared because we don't understand it.
Right. Right. I mean, we still use stuff like that today. Flipping a coin, a magic 8 ball. That, I mean, literally, magic's in the name. So that's forms of magic.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time on all of this, and
Absolutely.
all
Thank you
of
for
your
having me.
input. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yes.